Hello and welcome to Train Signal. You're watching the bonus video entitled Linux Tips and Tricks. This is part of Fast Track CBT Video, Linux Networking and Administration. In this video, first off we'll talk about how to play Windows media files in Linux. Then we'll move on to how to dual boot a Windows and a Linux workstation. And then finally, some Linux tips and tricks to speed up your navigation skills. So we'll start off with how to play Windows media files in Linux. Now in Windows, you're used to just running Windows Media Player and just playing a Windows Media Video or Windows Media Audio file. Those are the two different types of audio and video files that Windows creates by default. You can also play with Windows Media Player, of course, other formats like MP3s, MPEG video, and a long list of other types of audio and video formats. In fact, today there's so many different types of audio and video formats available, it gets really confusing. There's Windows Audio and Video, QuickTime, MPEG, DVD, a lot of different types of DVDs. There's MP3s, CDs, there's even TiVo video files, and on and on. So being able to play these without any trouble in Linux, or even Windows sometimes, can be very challenging. But being able to play Windows media files specifically in Linux is much more challenging in Linux than it is in Windows, but it can be done. Now, in Linux, there's two different engines that offer the back end for video and audio playback. The first one is called GStreamer, and here's the website for GStreamer right here. The next one is called Zine. I call it Xine, but the correct pronunciation is Zine, as in Max Zine without the MA on there. So Zine is available from this website here. Now these are just the back ends. These aren't the front end applications that you actually use, but they're still required. Now you can have a variety of different command line or GUI front ends for both of these different engines. Of course, usually if you're wanting to play videos, you're usually expecting a graphical front end. Now Fedora Linux version 5 comes with a media player called Totem, and this is really a GStreamer front end. It works with a variety of different media types, and on the menu bar you can access it by clicking on Movie Player, and I'll show you how to get to that when we go over to the Linux workstation. But don't confuse Totem or Movie Player with MPlayer. MPlayer is a command line tool used to play video and audio formats or files, but it's different from Movie Player. So Movie Player and MPlayer are different. In fact, Movie Player really is just Totem. Now we're going to use what they call MPlayer or GMPlayer. MPlayer, like I said, is a command line tool used to play audio and video files. GMPlayer is a GUI tool used to play audio and video files. So we're going to use these to play Train Signal Windows Media video files or WMV files. Now the steps to do this aren't easy exactly, but we have some steps right here and they do work and they're tested, and you should be able to reproduce these yourself. So with that, let's give it a try. First we're going to add the Fresh RPMs archive to Yum. Yum is our download manager. It's where we're able to download new applications directly from the internet, but it needs to know where to download those applications from. You know, what's available out there. So I'm going to use this command here, rpm-ivh, and then the name of this archive from a website called freshrpms.net. Once we have that configured in there, it's going to update the Yum archive. Then I'm going to use Yum to download MPlayer and the associated applications. So I'm going to run this command right here, yum-y install MPlayer, MPlayer skins, and MPlayer fonts. Once we have that player, we need codecs. Codecs are coders and decoders for audio and video files. So to get those, I'm going to download this file here, all 2005-0412.tar.bz2 from this website. Once I have that, I'm going to untar it, I'm going to copy it to two different directories, and I'm going to change the permissions on it. Next, I'll test the sound card, just make sure sound works, and then I'll play the WMV file using the GM player. This is the graphical version minus VO. This stands for video output, and we're using the X11 video output. That'll bring it up, and then we'll, in the GUI interface there, we'll select the training Windows Media file that we want to play, and hopefully you'll see that it all worked. So let's give it a try. I'm going to go over here to my Linux server. So we're here on our Linux server, and what I've already done is I've downloaded this file called intro.wmv. It's a Windows Media video file, and this is actually the introduction video to this series of Linux training labs. So our goal is to get this to play inside Linux. Now if I double click on this right now, let's show what happens. It opens up Totem. Totem is the default movie player, and it says it could not play this file because you don't have the decoder installed. Now there may be a way to get Totem to play this by installing the proper decoder. In fact, there's so many different media players for Linux, and there's so many different decoders, it's almost impossible to keep track of all of them and everything they do. So I'm not saying that Totem cannot be used to play these Windows Media files, but it's just not the one that I'm going to demonstrate. So let's close this out. And Totem was actually accessed or can be run by going to Applications, Sound and Video, and then right here to Movie Player. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to check our sound card first. Let me make sure our sound card works, because we want to have sound. So I'm going to go to Sound Card Detection, and I'm going to click play here. First, well, let's turn up the volume all the way. Yes, we heard the sample sound, and I'll say close. So now we know we have sound. That's a good thing. You want to make sure you do that. Alright, the next thing we want to do is we want to add the Fresh RPMs archive to Yum. So to do that, I'm going to open up a command line prompt using Xterm, and I'm going to type RPM -IVH, and then this URL for the Fresh RPMs archive. Wow, that's a lot. I didn't have all that in my head. I actually did find that on the internet as a great place to download files like MPlayer and GMPlayer that we're about to download. So I actually got that off the internet. So if you were to open up your web browser and go out to the internet and find the different websites or the Fresh RPMs website that I found this on, you could just maybe copy and paste this. And it's also going to be in the slides that come with the video. So you can get the URL directly off of there. So I'm going to press enter here. Hopefully I typed it right. Okay, good. It updated. I found that as an archive. Now I'm going to use yum -y space install to install MPlayer, MPlayer-skins, and MPlayer-fonts. Oh, got to take off this dash right there. Alright, here we go, installing MPlayer. Okay, and I know from experience that this could actually take a few minutes, so I don't want you to sit here and have to wait. I'm going to pause the video until it's done downloading MPlayer, and I'll come right back as soon as it's done. Okay, I'm back, and the installation has completed. Let me go over here and show you exactly what happened. So you can see down here it says complete. That's the most important thing. And we installed MPlayer, MPlayer fonts, and MPlayer skins, but there were also like 13 other dependencies or other applications, all these applications down here, that were required to make these programs up here work. So you can see we installed all these right here. Let me scroll up. And here's where we downloaded all these 16 different applications. There was a total of 20 megabytes to be downloaded. So we downloaded 16 different packages, 20 megabytes, and installed them to get this new media player to work. But wait, we're not done yet. We still need to install codecs. Codecs are the coders and decoders that will allow this player to understand or interpret the Windows Media audio and video formats. So it's great that we have the player here, but now we need to go and get the codecs. So I'm going to exit out of this. I'm going to open this web browser here, Firefox. And up here in the address bar, I'm going to put http www.mplayerhq.hu/M player/releases/codecs. Alright, and these are different codecs I can download. So I'm going to download this one right here, all 2005-0412.tar.bz2. It's 12 megabytes. I'll click on that. I'll say I want to save it to the disk. And it begins downloading it. Now, once it's downloaded, I'm going to need to untar it and then move it over to two different folders. So let me open up my X terminal or my terminal window. And I'll have that ready as soon as it's done downloading. Move it over here. Alright, the download's done. By default, it's downloading those to our desktop. So I'm going to close this out. Right now I'm in /root, root's home directory. I'm going to cd into desktop and do ls-l. And here you can see these are the codecs I downloaded. And it's colorized there because it's a compressed archive. And then here's the WMV, or the file we're trying to play. So I need to uncompress this. So to do that, I'm going to first, I'm just going to make a temp directory. Then I'm going to tar xvfj, the file in the previous directory called tar.bz2. So it uncompresses this into our temp directory, into a directory called all-2005-0412, and then underneath that are all these codecs. So if I do an ls-l and I cd into all, and I just hit tab right there to make that auto-complete. Okay, so in here, here's all our codecs. Now what I need to do is put these in two different directories. So if I first, let's do an ls in user local lib. Okay, it didn't show anything. Actually, let's cd over to user local lib and do ls-l. Okay, there's nothing in there. That really was true. So I'm going to make a directory here called codecs. Okay, now I'm going to cd back to my home directory, desktop, temp, to ls, cd into this new directory here we created, and I'm going to copy everything in here over to user local lib codecs. And it copies all those files. The next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to create a new shell, and I'm going to cd into user lib, do a ls-l, there's a lot of stuff in there, but what I'm looking for is a Win32 directory. Is there a Win32 directory? There is, right here, Win32. So I'm going to cd into Win32, do ls-l, and there's nothing in there. So when I exit out of my shell right here, I'm back in the directory I was in before. Just a little tip and trick right there. If you want to create a shell, you can do that. You can go do something else. You exit out of the shell and you're right back where you were before. So now I can copy these files. I'm going to use the up arrow there to get back to the command I did previously. And I'm going to copy them into user lib win32. Alright, now I'm going to cd into user lib win32. I'm going to do a change mod 755 on all the files in here. I'm going to cd into user local lib codecs. Do ls. There's all our codecs. And I'm going to do a change mod 755 in here too. Alright. So we're done installing the codecs that were required. We tested our sound card. We know that works. The next thing to do is to play these, play our file, play our Windows Media file. So if I cd back to root/desktop and I type gm player minus vox11. By default, if you just run gm player, it'll say there's a problem with the video output. So what I'm doing here is I'm telling it to use X11 as the video output device. Now I'm sure you can go configure this somewhere in a configuration file, but I just haven't taken the time to do that yet. So I'm just going to hit enter here, and it's going to start up GM Player. Alright, if you look down here it says M Player. If I click on that, there's the M Player, and here's the little control panel for it. So to open the video we want to open, I'm going to click here, and I'm going to click on this intro.wmv. So we're successfully playing our Windows Media video file. I just paused the video. You probably can't hear the sound, but there is sound coming out of the speakers. If I get too close up to the speakers, you'll just hear a whining noise from this microphone. But I assure you the sound is working, and obviously the video is playing here. This is the introduction video to the Linux Networking and Administration video series that you've been watching. And you can click play here. You can fast forward through it like that. Of course, change the volume, you know, whatever it is you want to do. So we were successfully able to play our Windows Media video file in Linux using GM Player or M Player. We were able to do that by following a number of different steps to finally get it done, but we were able to do it. It wasn't quite as easy as it would be in Windows, let's say, but we were able to get it done. Now, you don't have to take that series of steps exactly. You might find another program in Linux that works just great for you. There's so many different programs available out there. You will probably have to add codecs to just about any of them to be able to play Windows Media files. So with that, let's go back to our slides. And now we can talk about how to dual boot a Windows Linux workstation. First off, there are many ways to dual boot a Windows and Linux workstation. The key to having a dual booting system that works is proper planning. Prior to loading any operating system, you should read and research dual booting. Dual booting is no easy task. Properly planning your dual boot configuration will make it a success. Now, a bootloader is a program that allows you to select different operating systems, different versions of the same operating system, or different booting options of the same OS. Grub and Lilo are examples of bootloaders that come with Linux. Windows has NTLoader, but it's meant to be used only to boot versions of Windows. However, with a program called BootPart, NTLoader can be used to boot both Windows and Linux. So in general, here are some of the different dual booting scenarios I came up with. First off, you have Windows already loaded and you load Linux, but you need to shrink your partition to make room for Linux. Now this is doing this all on the same disk. So let me say that again. You already have Windows loaded. You want to load Linux, but to load Linux you have to shrink your Windows partition, because by default when you installed Windows, most likely you chose to use your entire hard drive. So that's one way of dual booting. And that is a possible scenario, to go in and shrink your Windows partition. Another option is you reload Windows, but you leave room for Linux and you install them on the same disk. That's possible too. Another option is you have two disks and you load Windows on one and Linux on another. Or you could install both operating systems in a FAT32 partition on the same disk, which I wouldn't recommend. Or you have virtualization, which is what I've been using to demonstrate Linux in this series of videos. You use something like VMware or Microsoft Virtual PC or Virtual Server to run Linux inside your Windows operating system. In fact, you can even get a VMware for Linux, and you could run Linux and you could run Windows inside a VMware partition or virtual computer inside your Linux system. So there's a lot of different options here. The scenario I'm going to demonstrate is this right here. Okay, you already have Windows XP loaded and it's on a single disk drive. It takes up the entire disk drive. That's what most of us have. You know, when we install Windows, by default we just use the entire disk because we want to be able to use the entire disk. And probably you weren't planning on adding Linux later. So to use Linux or run Linux on the same PC, let's say you add a second hard drive, which I'm going to do over here on our virtual system. Then you load Linux on the second hard drive. Now when you load Linux, you configure it to load Linux and grub on the second hard drive. It will create the boot partition on the second drive as well. Once Linux is loaded, you go back into Windows and you download bootpart from the internet. You tell bootpart to copy the boot partition of the second drive and add a line to your boot INI to load Linux. So you'll use NTLoader to choose between Windows or Linux. Then you reboot your system and you're given the choice to boot either Windows or Linux. This is just one of the many multiple boot scenarios, but it's the one that I want to demonstrate for you now. So I'm going to go over here to my virtual server, and I'm going to go to this Windows XP installation here. Now you'll have to pretend with me for a minute. Pretend that you have this one computer. It has two hard drives. On the first hard drive you've installed Windows, and you have that partition or that entire hard drive partitioned for Windows. It's all for Windows. On the second hard drive you have nothing, and you've just inserted the Linux installation CD, disk 1, into the hard drive. You turned on your computer. It said, do you want to install Linux? You said yes, and it asked you a couple basic questions about what language and what keyboard you want. Then it asks you about partitioning your hard drive, and that's the point that we're at right now. So here we are in the Fedora installation, and it's asking me, how do I want to partition my hard drive? Well, what I've done is I've selected here, remove all partitions on selected drives and create a default layout. So I have to be careful on what drive I select. The first disk here, or HDA, is the drive that I have Windows installed on. Notice it's an 8 GB hard drive. Then I have another hard drive called HDB. It's another 8 GB hard drive. What I've done is I've selected this second hard drive right here. I don't want to install Linux on top of Windows. I want to install Linux on the second hard drive. I've also checked to review and modify the partition layout. I don't want to take any chances. I want to see all the advanced configuration. Make sure I get the option to choose every choice that's available. So I'm going to click Next, and it says you've chosen to remove all partitions, all data on the following drive, HDB. That's our new hard drive, our second hard drive. I'm going to say yes. So now it shows me HDA1 up here is the first hard drive. HDB2 down here is the second hard drive. And if I scroll down here and look at the hard drives, I can see it's going to put a boot partition on the very first part of HDB, and then it's going to put the logical volume physical partition or physical volume on the rest of the hard drive. That's good. That's good for me. I'm going to edit the properties here on the boot partition, and I'm just going to kind of look it over. It's an ext3 file system. It's 100 megabytes. It's going on HDB. I'm going to say force to be a primary partition just to be safe, and I'll say OK. And let's say next. And then this is important here. It says the Grub bootloader will be installed on dev HDA. That's where Windows is. You know, I don't want Windows to be overwritten by the Grub bootloader. I don't want any problems with that. I'm going to check Configure Advanced Bootloader Options down here and say Next. Now here it asks me, where do I want to install the bootloader record on? Well, I don't want it on dev HDA. I want it on dev HDB1, the first sector of the boot partition. I can click Change Drive Order here. I'm not going to mess with that. I'm just going to say Cancel. But this is an important option. Install Grub on the first sector of the boot partition on dev HDB1. So I'm going to say Next. And then from here on out, it's just the regular Linux installation. My time zone, root password. It retrieves the installation information. It's going to ask me about what packages I want to install. So the most important pieces back there were Grub, where I want Grub installed, and then the hard drive that I want Linux installed on. So it's just going to be the regular installation from here on out. It might take 45 minutes to install all the different software. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pause this. Let's go back to our host operating system, and let's pretend that the Linux installation has completed. The whole installation went through, it's done, and it rebooted. And then what came up is Windows. You're just back to your regular old Windows operating system. And what you need to do there is run bootpart. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move forward and go to a different snapshot where I can show you what happens after we've installed Linux and Windows, but we need to go into Windows and we need to configure bootpart. So that's this snapshot right here, working Windows XP and Linux with no bootpart. So I've installed both operating systems. I'm going to click Go To because it'll take a second here. It'll take a second to bring up that working Windows XP and Linux with no bootpart. So we've installed Windows, it works. It's on the primary disk. We installed Linux. We put it on the second disk. We told Grub to be installed on that second disk in the boot partition. And we installed Linux on the second disk. We rebooted our Linux after it was done. And what's going to happen is your PC will just come right back into Windows, because that's what's on the primary hard drive and that's what's going to be found. So in just a second we'll come up to that Windows operating system like we just booted it up. And what we need to do now is we need to configure Windows to have this multi-boot using the NT loader. So I'm going to go into this Windows, this copy of Windows. So here we are in Windows, and we need the bootpart program. So to get that, I'm going to go to Start. Well, it found a CD in the drive. It found the Fedora Core CD that we just used for the installation. So I'm going to go to Start, Internet Explorer. I'm going to say stop right there. And I'm going to go to Google. I'm going to type in bootpart. And bootpart is downloadable from this website here, winimage.com. And here's the latest one here, bootpart, or bootpa26.zip. I'm going to click on that. I'm going to say save. I'm going to save it to my desktop. It's a very tiny file. I'm going to open it up. And you can see in here, here's the different applications. I'm going to copy all these. I'm going to go to up one folder. I'm going to go to my computer. I'm going to put them on the C drive, just right there. Alright, I'm going to close out this window, close out Internet Explorer. I'm going to open my command prompt, and I'm going to go to the C drive. And there's bootpart right there, bootpart.exe. I'm going to type bootpart. And with bootpart, it tells me I have a C drive, and this is my C drive here. That's where my Windows is, 8 gigabytes. Then I have a D drive, and it says this is a Linux native D drive, and the size is 100 megabytes. So it tells me my status already here. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to type bootpart space list, and this tells me what my boot INI file looks like. So this is the only entry in the boot INI right now, entry 0, which loads my Microsoft Windows XP Professional. So to add the entry for Linux, I'm going to type bootpart, and let's just type /? After that, and let's look at all the different options. So bootpart space partition number space the file name space the name of the system. So let's give it a try. Bootpart. The partition number is going to be this number right here, number 1. So I'm going to type bootpart 1. The name of the file, I'm going to call it, this is the actual file that bootpart's going to reference. It's a copy of what's in the boot partition over on the Linux system. So I'm going to call it boot linux.lnx, and then the name that we want to call this, I'm going to call it Linux Fedora Core 5. And it tells me that our boot INI was updated. You can see here, here's entry. That's not entry, but let's look at the boot INI. Right here. Here we go. Entry number 1, boot linux.lnx, Linux Fedora Core 5. So what should happen when we reboot our copy of Windows here is we should be given a choice between Windows or Linux. So let's give it a try. I'm going to say let's turn off this computer. Take just a second to shut down the PC. Alright, it shut it down. I'm going to click power on right here. Alright, and the PC's booting up. And then here, this is what we're looking for. We're given a choice between Microsoft Windows XP Professional or Linux Core Fedora Core 5. So I'm going to select Linux, and let's see if it works. Sure enough, it's booting up Linux Fedora. Now, before it goes all the way through the boot, I'm just going to power it off, and let's reboot it again, and let's see if it finds Windows successfully. We want to make sure that our Windows still works. So now I'm given the choice again. I'm going to select Windows. And there we go. We're booting up into Windows. So you can see how this works. Let me go back to our slides. So in conclusion, we were able to dual boot Windows and Linux. We were able to do this by creating a second hard drive, or having a second hard drive installed in our system. There's our Windows booting up. Installing Linux on that second hard drive, having Windows on our first hard drive, selecting inside the Linux installation options to install Linux on the second hard drive, to install the bootloader or grub in the second hard drive's boot partition. Then we booted back into Windows, and we used this bootpart program to tell Windows to use NTLoader to give you a choice between Windows and Linux. Then we successfully tested that by attempting a boot of each of the different operating systems. And I can assure you both operating systems successfully booted. I know we didn't go into Linux all the way, but it would have taken a little bit of time to boot up. So just take my word for it. Both operating systems successfully booted. I tested it a number of times. So with that, we can go on to Linux tips and tricks. Now we're going to talk about Linux tips and tricks to help speed up your Linux navigation skills. A couple generic tips that I want to start off with. First, the first one is get used to the console, also called the CLI, the command line interface, or the X Windows terminal. By getting used to this text interface, eventually you'll be able to move around Linux and do things in Linux a lot faster. So much of Linux is based on that command line interface. You will spend a lot more time trying to do something by pointing and clicking, or in many cases it might be impossible to do it by pointing and clicking. So the sooner you get used to the command line interface, the better off you'll be. Another tip is to find binaries and RPMs for your version of Linux. There are lots of great websites to download pre-compiled binaries and applications for Linux. On the other hand, eventually you'll come to a point where you want to install an application and there is no binary for it. So this can happen if you're not running a popular version of Linux like Fedora, or even with Fedora it can happen many times when there just isn't a binary available. Maybe it's a brand new application, or maybe somebody's not taking the time to compile it for your version of Fedora. In that case, you'll have to compile it yourself. My suggestion is don't be afraid of this. Just jump right in, give it a try. You'll have to install the C compiler. Many times it'll work right off. Other times you'll have to edit config files, and it can get really hairy. So give it a shot. Don't be afraid to go out and try to compile source code for Linux. Now I want to talk about some desktop shortcut keys. So you're inside the Linux desktop. Here are some different keys you can use to try to make navigation faster. Just like in Windows, you can use print screen and alt print screen. You can use Alt F10 to maximize a window, Alt F5 to restore it, Alt F4 to close it, Alt F9 to minimize it, Control Shift or Shift Control Alt Left to move the active window into one of the other workspaces. Those are the four little boxes in the bottom right hand corner. The different desktops, sort of like having a big monitor, but you can't see it all at the same time. Then there's Alt Tab to move between windows, and Alt Escape to move between windows differently. Then we have Control Alt Left to move from one workspace to another. Then there's Control Alt Backspace, which will kill your entire X Windows desktop session. If we scroll on down, here's a few other keys. If you're in the X Windows terminal, you can use Tab for command completion, up arrow to scroll through previous commands, Control C to kill a process, Control Shift C to copy, and Control Shift V to paste. If you're in Firefox, you can use Control C just like in Windows to copy, Control X to cut, Control V to paste, and Control F to find. Then at the command line, these are the keys where the caret here, or the little up arrow, represents a control. So Control A will move to the beginning of a line. Control B moves one character backwards. This is just like left arrow. There's Control E to move to the end of the line. Control F is one character forward. Control L is refresh the screen. Control M is move the cursor to the next line. This is just like return. Control N is move to the next history. Same as down arrow, Control N. Control P is same as up arrow. Control T swaps the position of the current and previous characters. Control U is delete from the current point backwards, and Control W is delete one word backwards. Wow, that's a lot of different hotkeys, I know. Let's go over to our Linux server and let's give these a try. Alright, so we're on our Linux server and I have a Firefox window open here. So one thing I can do is I can hold down Alt and I can hit F4, and I just closed it out. Let's open it up again, and let's say it's a little bit smaller here and I want to maximize it. I can hold down Alt and hit F10 to maximize the window. I can hold down Alt and hit F9 to minimize the window. Let's see, we can open the window up here, and notice we're using the third workspace down here. Now let's say I want to move this window to the left. I can hold down Shift, hold down Control, Alt, and hit left, and it moves this window to a different workspace. So now it's in this workspace down here. You saw the window moving down here. Now say I had a second window open. Let me open another one. And say I wanted to change between these windows. I can hold down Alt and hit Tab. Just like that, change between the windows. I can hold down Alt and hit Escape, and it immediately just changes between these windows. Just a different way of doing it. The other thing I can do is I can hold down Control Alt and then hit left or right, and I can move between these different workspaces. Pretty cool tools. So let me close these out. The next thing I want to show you is in an Xterm, or the X Windows terminal. If I go to Accessories and start an Xterm, let's say I type some commands here. I'll type ls, dir, cd \, ls, cd, ls. So I typed a bunch of commands. The other thing I can do here is I can scroll through my command history using the up arrow, like that. So say I find ls and I want to edit it. I can add something at the end of the line. I can use Control A and I can go to the start of the line. Control E will take me to the end of the line. Control W deletes one word at a time. Let's see. Control F moves a character forward. Control B moves a character backward, so that's just like left arrow. Control L will refresh the screen. Usually that's used in text-based menuing applications, maybe where something gets messed up. I can type a bunch of stuff here and go back, and Control U will delete from that point all the way to the front. Let's see, Control T swaps characters like that. A lot of different cool things you can do with the command line. Okay, let me type another command here. Say I want to mark something with my cursor. I can do Control Shift C to copy that, and then down here I can do Control Shift V to paste it in. See, so I was able to copy something. Say I wanted to scroll up here, I wanted to copy my ls-l, Control Shift C, I go down here and Control Shift V, Control Shift V, there we go, and paste it in. It happens so fast. Let's try it again. ls, and I'm just going to copy that ls command there. Control Shift C, go down here, Control Shift V, paste it in. So there's lots of cool things you can do with the command line to speed up your navigation and your administration and configuration of Linux. With that, let's exit out, and we'll go back to our slides. So in this section we talked about Linux tips and tricks. We talked about how important the command line interface is to learn. I suggest you get in there and just use it as much as you can until you feel more and more comfortable with the command line interface, till you get fast with repeating commands and editing command lines, and then get some good experience changing between windows, maximizing and minimizing, and using workspaces in Linux to your advantage. Now let's move on to our next slide, and we've come to the conclusion of the bonus video for Linux networking and administration. In this video we talked about how to play Windows media files in Linux, and we went through the whole process of how to load up the codecs, and MPlayer was the application we chose, how to use MPlayer and GMPlayer to play a Train Signal Windows Media video. Then we went on to learn about dual booting and how there's many different ways to dual boot Windows and Linux. In our example, we showed you how to configure a Windows workstation, add a second hard drive, install Linux on that hard drive, and then use the BootPart program and NT-Loader to dual boot between Windows and Linux. Finally, we learned some shortcut and hotkeys to navigate Linux command line interface and also the graphical interface more expediently. So this has been a great video. I hope you've enjoyed it, and thank you for watching Train Signal.